Hello and welcome back into another edition of the Chiefs Training Camp Report on the Arrowhead Pride Podcast Network. Hopefully, we won't have any issues today. My power went out yesterday in the middle of the show. So we're going to kind of recap some things that we didn't get to talk about yesterday, as well as some things that we saw in the practice field up in St. Joseph, Missouri today. So without further ado, let me welcome in the leader of Arrowhead Pride, Pete Sweeney. It's Peanut Thursday, Sween. What's going on up in St. Joe?
Hey, Steve. Yes, it is hot again for the second day in a row, a little bit muggy. I think we were in the 70s or 80s, probably in the low 80s right now, if I had to guess. And it's really supposed to pick up temperature-wise on Sunday. The veterans, we've been told, will be getting here, somewhere between Friday night and Saturday night. It's a little bit atypical than maybe it's been in previous years where there was a designated time. And in the days of the sausage Anthony Sherman, you would see him show up. It's a little bit looser this year. It's probably because there are just so many days of training camp. We are starting in mid-July as opposed to late July. And I think Andy Reid is a little bit looser about when these guys are going to be showing up. And so that'll happen over the weekend, and it'll really start to heat up in the 90s and approach the high 80s in the 90s and even get as high as 100, I believe, as far as a high goes into next week. And so trying to enjoy the cooler weather right now while we can.
Yeah. Next week, last time I looked at the forecast, it said every day might approach 100. So it is going to be hot next week on that St. Joseph, Missouri practice field.
You begin to wonder if there is a t-shirt requirement for the media at that point. I mean, that's even going to be hot under the tents. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Dress appropriately, hydrate plenty. Rashee Rice, they need to make sure that he is drinking plenty of fluids after yesterday's practice. And we can get into some of that stuff today, Pete. But first off, I want to ask you about running back Isaiah Pacheco. He's been one of the more popular storylines. He's on the practice field, but in the non-contact jersey after a couple of off-season surgeries. But he seems like he is in really good spirits, and he seems like he is expecting to be ready to go for week one.
Yeah. Before your power went out yesterday, I was explaining what we're seeing up here because there's less video. We won't get the full video of all the camp until Sunday when you're able to shoot the whole practice. But Isaiah Pacheco looks like at this stage like he was almost never injured, right? We know about the labrum and we know about the hand surgeries that had to occur after the Super Bowl. He was playing through pain and injury in the Super Bowl, so a credit to him for doing that. But he's cutting really well. The burst and the angry explosiveness that he's known for is there. Has showed no issues out of the backfield, catching passes in stride, high pointing balls. And then, we finally get him in the media room today, the podium, and the Chiefs won't do that unless a guy is feeling good, right? We have seen a tendency for the Chiefs not to put guys even at the press conferences if they're ailing a little bit. And so Isaiah Pacheco seems to be coming along. I did ask him directly, do you feel like you'll be ready for week one? And in Pacheco fashion, soft-spoken at the podium, but direct, he said absolutely. So I don't think 49 days away there's anything for any Chiefs fans or fantasy owners alike to be worried about. Isaiah Pacheco's going to be good to go against the Detroit Lions.
Yeah, if you did a fantasy draft in the last couple of days and you were swooping up Clyde Edwards-Helaire, hoping he was going to be a value for you in the first few weeks, it seems like that is not the case based on what we heard from Isaiah Pacheco today.
Yeah, I would use your later picks on a more muddled situation somewhere else around the league.
So I want to talk to you about the wide receivers. Obviously, that's I think, position group that we have the most questions on heading into the 2023 regular season. And I'm assuming no Justyn Ross again today. I know we talked about it yesterday, but we got cut off before I feel like we could really get into details.
Yeah, this has been a point I think fans have been looking for. And people that are out there that are really hoping that Justyn Ross is a thing and what a treat that would be for the Kansas City Chiefs. Those folks are coming into defense. I've seen on social media saying, well, this is a veteran and quarterback camp. Yeah, but Mike Edwards is here. Yeah, we talked about Pacheco. Cornell Powell, drafted a couple years ago. He's up here. So as you're trying to use deductive reasoning on this thing, think it creates one of two situations when it comes specifically to Justyn Ross. It's A, the Chiefs have held him back and decided to. Remember, he missed portions of the offseason because they were being cautious for one reason or another. Remember, they don't provide us injury reports in the offseason, but it seemed like they were holding him back, similar to Edwards, similar to McDuffie, with some kind of injury. So that's one scenario. The other scenario is perfectly healthy, and someone who really wants to make this team, who missed all of last year, just decided not to be up here. And so either way, it has to be one of those. You're not really feeling great about the whole Justyn Ross situation. I had mentioned on the podcast yesterday that I have him probably at wide receiver 10 on my list right now. So I think he has some work to do, especially after the first day that we saw from Nico Remigio, another camp hopeful that has sort of entered the mix here. And the bottom line is, I think the Chiefs are keeping 6 receivers anyway. So, even if Ross were to have a spectacular camp, I think the ceiling you're looking at, it's probably the practice squad if he were to make it through. But again, to make the practice squad, you actually have to have practices at training camp. And I'm not even sure if we'll see that on Sunday. So a little bit of a wait and see on Justyn Ross. But I'll be honest with you guys, and I hate to say this, I'm not optimistic.
I think early in the offseason, I was kind of talking myself into Justyn Ross. And as we've progressed, I'm kind of leaning more towards where you are, Pete. And I feel like for him to make this team, especially with as many wide receivers as they brought in, he's really going to have to flash something in this veteran camp. It's not at a point where, you as a rookie, you don't even get him on the field at all, basically. And now you have to, now you need him to really show up and make an impact or show that he belongs on the roster.
Right. And forget about the top 6 that we know, which we know about the stone cold 4 locks. That includes Rashee Rice, who's the rookie. So the 2 spots that I think people want to force these potential people into would be the Justin Watson spot. It would be the Richie James spot. And again, they have guaranteed money that you'd be throwing away if the Chiefs do keep 6 receivers. And then, you get to the hopefuls, and where I was saying where Nico Remigio is on the field, he has a nice day yesterday. I tend to think he'll be on the practice squad. Mir Smith-Marset had a nice offseason. John Ross provides that returning upside that I don't think Justyn Ross does. And so not only is it hard to get him in the top 6, which is where you need to be, I don't have him in front of a couple guys that are hopefuls, at this point, because we just haven't seen him on the field. So I hate to be Debbie Downer when it comes to Justyn Ross. I know that I've been like that since last year, but you got to really see this guy on the field if you're going to just pencil him into the 53-man roster. And I just have not seen it with my own eyes yet. And of course, I always add this. I hope I'm very wrong about this, but I'm just telling you and how I'm describing how I see it at this stage.
Yeah, and bringing in a player like Richie James, which we found out the Chiefs at one point actually tried to trade for him. And his versatility as a returner and things like that. They're just things you probably don't have in Justyn Ross. So it's going to be tough for him. And you mentioned Rashee Rice, obviously 2nd-round pick. He's going to be a lock to make this roster, but had a little bit of a tough go on day 1 of rookies and quarterbacks. It seems like he did not throw up today. So how was day 2 for the rookie wide receiver?
Yeah, you mentioned it. It was day 1. And he was running around like crazy, and he did end up having some nausea, some exhaustion, and did vomit on the field day 1. It kind of joked about it at the podium, and that's par for the course. We've seen other players throw up at practice, and it's crazy. I mean, you look at these athletes, I know they're paid a lot of money, but they just get right up and go on to the next play in a couple minutes time, and he was able to do that. It is worth mentioning because we had said that during OTAs, Andy Reid was forthcoming and saying that he had some conditioning to do. Apparently he did that with his former SMU teammate Shane Buechele ahead of camp. I thought that was a very interesting piece of the press conference that he had yesterday. Patrick Mahomes had some other things going on, as we saw very publicly, and so he linked up with Shane Buechele and got some insight into where Patrick Mahomes is going to want him. And we mentioned there was some exhaustion yesterday. He seemed to be taking it a little bit more easy between plays on Thursday, but when the ball was snapped, I thought he still continues to look like he is one of those guys that is well above the rest of the players at this camp, and he should be, right? This was a draft pick for the Chiefs, and one that they hope can contribute in some capacity by the end of the year. We know about the history with Andy Reid receivers. Sometimes it takes a year in their system to really get going. But the Chiefs could use him, right? They didn't get Juju Smith-Schuster back. They weren't able to land DeAndre Hopkins. We know about Kadarius Toney's injury history, and so the quicker that Rashee Rice can come along here, the better the Chiefs will be. And so maybe he can buck that trend of Andy Reid wide receivers really coming into their own in their second season rather than their first.
And moving to the defensive side of the ball, we talked a little bit about Tershawn Wharton before we were abruptly interrupted yesterday. So obviously he's working his way back from an ACL injury that ended his season last year, but he's a player who has shown promise for the Chiefs in the past. And just curious if you got any other insight on Tershawn Wharton at today's camp, because if he's not ready for week one, if he's a player that has to miss the first few games of the season or something like that, we could see a ton of rookie Keandre Coburn in the mix for the Chiefs defensive line.
Yeah, and you have Charles Omenihu, who's that inside-outside guy. I think they really like the prospect of him next to Chris Jones. Derek Nottie is back in the mix here, so Chiefs are okay when it comes to tackles. But Turk is a very underrated player and has been for years, and finally saw him maybe breaking through last year before the injury. I remember, Steve, and if you're a Chiefs fan, you remember this play when I say it. One of the craziest plays we've seen in recent years is when he had that interception against the Washington football team where he pinned the ball in David Tyree fashion against the guy's head and kind of sealed the game for Kansas City. He's a playmaker. He is a guy that'll knock down balls at the line, run stuffing type of guy. And so the sooner that he's ready, the better. It's good to see that we have him up here right now going through rehab. It's been off to the sideline. We talked about Pacheco. Pacheco's been on the field. He's been doing everything but 7-on-7. Turk Wharton is a ways away from there. So he's going to start on the physically unable to perform, the PUP list. And we'll see when he is activated and does take in a practice. This is a little bit atypical this year. We mentioned it at the top about how long training camp is. There's still 49 days to the regular season. So I think we're getting a little bit earlier look at what his rehab has been. I'm not ready to say that we're necessarily going to see Turk before the start of the season. Right now, you're just seeing him do rehab type drills on the sideline. If he were to stay on that PUP, he would miss the first 6 weeks of the year. Again, that is a big time wait and see. We'll see as we go, but they would certainly like to have him in the mix. It's just going to be how soon can he come along from that torn ACL.
Yeah, and you mentioned it. Charles Omenihu is a guy that I think Brett Veach even called him a defensive tackle. Like he's a guy that has moved inside and outside his entire career.
So just a quick point on Omenihu. I know we're talking about camp these past 2 days. He's not up here yet. He'll be here sometime Friday and Saturday. I think the part that the Chiefs really liked was his upside inside. Not to say that, like Chris Jones, he can't for a third of the time pop on the outside, and we know that defensive line coach Joe Cullen likes to mix and match. But yes, I believe the Chiefs acquired him more so for what he can do on the inside of the line.
And final thing for me, Pete, before we get out of here and let you try to get to writing so you can get back from St. Joseph, Missouri. We heard from Isaiah Pacheco. We already mentioned that. We also heard from rookie Chamari Connor and veteran safety Mike Edwards today. Any takeaways from day 2 of Chiefs media availability?
Yeah, I mentioned that I think it was enormous for the Chiefs, for Pacheco and the training staff, per him to feel like that he's going to be completely ready 100% for the regular season. Mike Edwards, he did miss a portion of OTAs, and he had a hamstring injury, as he described. He also confirms he's 100% more of a rotational safety for the Kansas City Chiefs. So I think that's a good thing, and good to see him up here. I mean, that goes back to the Ross point, not to continue to just beat a dead horse, but the fact that he missed OTAs made him want to come up to Kansas City early to try to get a little bit of an edge on getting his playbook down so he can be ready for Sunday. This is a guy that's been in the league, won a Super Bowl championship, unfortunately, with those Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So just to see him up here, I thought was a very good thing. And Chamari Connor continues to learn the playbook, and that'll be important for him. I think this is going to be a learning year for him, more so than one where he is necessarily contributing. And so I think he's taken that in stride, learning a lot. Steve Spagnuolo throws a lot at these rookies, so he confirmed that and feels like he's in a good place, and we will see what he can do when the veterans arrive on Sunday.
Yeah, that's an underrated group that we should be paying attention to for the Kansas City Chiefs. Like, we know Justin Reed, who I think was tweeting last week or something about second year in Steve Spagnuolo's system, like watch out. And then you have Brian Cook, who showed all kinds of promise, is a rookie, and then the veteran Mike Edwards, who we're going to see a lot of this season. And then, I don't know if Jamari Connor's going to play a ton of defensive snaps as a rookie, but that safety room is quietly very interesting for the Kansas City Chiefs.
Yeah, Justin Reid early this offseason was honest about how long it really took to learn. I mean, it was the second half of the season. He mentioned the Bengals regular season game where he finally felt comfortable. So that's been one of my off-season bold predictions, and I think it is one of these things where Justin Reid feels really comfortable. He's going to feel really comfortable at the start of the year. When you do that, and Steve Spagnuolo puts you in the right positions, you might have more interceptions, which tends to lead you to potentially an all-pro season. So I like the prospect of an all-pro season for Justin Reid this year.
He's Pete Sweeney. You can follow him on Twitter at PG Sween. Make sure you're checking out all of our training camp coverage over at arrowheadpride.com and right here on the Arrowhead Pride Podcast Network. If you're listening to us on the podcast page, make sure you stick around. Immediately following the camp report, we will have all of the press conferences from today. That's running back Isaiah Pacheco, rookie safety Jamari Connor, and veteran safety Mike Edwards. And as always, please make sure you subscribe, rate, and review everything that we are doing on the Arrowhead Pride Podcast Network. Veterans Report tomorrow. Pete, we will talk to you again.
All right.